What Pan Zawisza actually did in Bitola. Zawisza had climbed out of his soiled yellow habitat with its chipping plaster. He was hungry, and in his pocket were the last 3 cigarettes of a misshapen lump of a pack that was decorated with the image of a stately arch of railway tracks. On top of the tracks were the black letters B, and beneath them was the inscription King Shiz in imposing Cyrillic. Produced for the honor and fame of the railway connection between Belgrade and Bari. From November 4th Street, Zawisza turned onto May 1st Avenue to walk in the pleasant dusk by the Dragor River, which differed from other rivers in the striking beauty of its cobblestone bed. He strained to think how it was possible to cobble river banks. They were almost like well rings. How can you build banks when there's water in them? But he didn't let the thought take over his mind. He strolled slowly past the old bazaar and the Yeni Mosque until he found a tavern that looked cozy enough to step into. He ordered a turli tava and a jug of beer, and bought 6 packs of cigarettes from the bar. Bitola girls weren't much to speak of. They had wide faces, big noses, and black, shining bunches of hair. Their skin was tan and Mediterranean, and they were often slightly big, while Zawisza had always preferred fey women. Thin, transparent, bright, ageless, with eyes that shined the world's ancient wisdom. As Pan Zawisza was a man of high principle, he was interested in ideas, not people, so he didn't even notice the chirping and snickering of the dolled-up woman at the next table. While he waited for his food, the waiter had to change his ashtray 6 times, because a polite server won't allow more than 2 cigarette butts to sit on the table at a time. The waiter didn't know that he had before him a human particle accelerator, for whom, despite his quiet, peaceful demeanor, the ages moved like days, and cigarettes were their centuries. How to say it more exactly? In all the time between lighting and tossing a cigarette, he had managed to think about Ragnarok, the saga of Eric the Red, and Old Norse, and, in the process, created a whole host of new gods, renamed some old ones, imagined a couple of new continents, and filled them with countries, forms of government, and international economic relations, and visualized their architecture and means of transportation. As he lit another cigarette, he was dealing with their religion and ethics. The diligent Macedonian couldn't have imagined that as he threw out the ash, he was also throwing out holy universes. A man in a green trench coat stood in front of the big white gate of the Jewish cemetery at the foot of Mount Baba in the city of Consuls. He looked pensively at the world's most sorrowful place, an empty hill full of sunken, collapsed gravestones, hemmed in by a gray-green fence. Eventually, the right words came to him. He was ready. These were the words Pan Zawisza had actually been sent to Bitola to think up. Poland doesn't need big changes or plot twists. The only thing Poland needs is to be master of its own life, to give every person the individual opportunity to build a bright future. It isn't possible to dream that into existence. This is the wish to realize your life and your country every day, joyfully and creatively. We believe that Poland's only goal is to inspire its people to succeed, as much individually as in collective life. This address, written to the first secretary, turned out to be the worst speech of all time, because it had been written in despair and failure. Big ideas, big goals. Where have they gotten us? Because it was true. Going to work at Juto had brought with it a widening of their social relations. For some reason, people believed that the thoughts of this young, visionary new generation might also pour some new blood into the national sphere. Of course, it was just as unbelievable, even impossible, that a troop of unschooled scamps should sit on the editorial board of old Story Juto as it was that some talent off the street should write an address to the first secretary. That simply does not happen, never and nowhere. But let us assume for the moment that, in such confusion, the Polish government would turn its attention to the Polish boys to find out, say, 10 things the government ought to do over the next 4 years. What should they start? What should they change, improve, carry out? If all the power in Poland were to belong to the boys, what good would they achieve? Well, up to 10 important things, ideas, thoughts about whatever era, no matter how narrow, how wide. No one will ever use your names, but your thoughts and ideas can end up on the government's docket. We are interested in hearing what Poland's young people would do to design a better country. Indeed, the famed ethicist Schweitzer thought that there is a certain kind of essential moral strength in youth, a kind of idealism that should be honored and preserved as one ages, because, though it is a person's central worth, it is easy to surrender it to the world. On what was secretly a work trip, the young Zawisza groaned under the burden of such a responsibility, and his heart condition was now quite serious. The more he thought, the more it seemed that change was impossible. There is no idea, thought, or important thing that will make people become better people, or the country a better country. Yes, the single most important commandment for Zawisza and for other young people was to let go of the past, leave it where it is, forgive it, make peace with it, and move on. But that won't happen. The past bubbles up like methane from a bog every time anyone steps on it with any weight. The unpleasant smell comes again. There is no fixing broken time. He had another interesting thought. How would it be if people in the here and now stopped choosing loneliness, daring instead to speak their minds honestly? The lion's share of people today are inert, their reason naps, and they have little to do with things not among their immediate obligations. Changing that is a necessary basis for any kind of social change. But how? How, if most people are closed off inside the echo chamber of their minds with their own amplified ancient thoughts? Adam once said, "We want to make a move, so we make a move." But many stay behind. They stay behind on account of missing teeth, or short legs, bald heads, beer bellies, their snickering, pudgy fingers, bad moods, their powerlessness, jealousy, mulishness, frugality, their cowardly hearts, and because nobody danced with them at parties. He had continued. So when we make that move, there might be an ingrained protest response. That's impossible. I generally don't recommend that reaction. I recommend that people repress it. The thought will make you docile. Generally, to do anything in this world, to say nothing of anything greater than the typical, you have to take on a kind of half-daft state of mind where you think everything is possible, while at the same time you have to approach everything with a certain detached ease to protect yourself against the pain of failure. Even if you do something very stupid, it's probably only you, and maybe one other person who will remember it 3 years later, and you probably won't have too many bad things to say about it. You exist in society as if alone in a room. You can do what you want. The worst thing that can happen is that nobody notices, but if nobody is going to notice you anyway, you have nothing to lose either. Big things are done because they're considered possible, and the attempt is frequently accompanied by jeering and snickering. A person who pines for some transparent historical knowledge but is, at the same time, convinced that inevitable failure is the nature of events, can offer no practical advice. What, here in our world, is the relationship between possibility and reality? An artist's thinking is a whittler's thinking. You work in a tiny crack and eat your daily bread, but before your eyes is the grand object, the kingdom of God, world revolution. It's hard to tell a stale story when there is a lost paradise behind you, a place where all are equal in the holiness of their souls. What remains is a feeling of powerlessness. If it is impossible to make your ideas understandable to others, their misinterpretation may lead to only greater evil. Tired, Zawisza touched the white wall of the graveyard with his hand. He felt that he was alone, and in just the most horrifying way. Alone among those closest to him. Oh, how tired a person can be of their thoughts. But God is most pleased by people not lying to themselves. After that, everything comes of itself. And free will, Free will makes it possible to be on the side of right, then on the side of wrong, and then on the side of right again in a single lifetime. All is never lost, there is always hope, and somewhere in the soul, even in its blindest hours, there will still burn maybe just one ray of light. You know you are allowed to err, that your error is not a verdict that falls upon your neck, but an opportunity to try again, to fail again, to try again, because out of all those endless failures, the kingdom of God may finally be born. The only thought that came to his mind was absolutely unfit for the task entrusted to him. It was that he had strange bodily sensations, and one of them was, "I have one leg." But what will Zawisza do if one of his legs leaves him? He'll write something, a new leg. Is it more or less the same with countries? If a new leg should be too expensive, then a cane, with a handle in the shape of a skull. Inside the handle is St. Andrew's toe bone and some illegal drugs. Who wouldn't choose to cooperate with the country if the country were capable of cooperation? The approach to country should generally be much more nuanced. If someone is interested in big things and world fame, then they will also be interested in Jesus, in religion, in forms of government, and in revolution. So it goes. It can't be any other way. Many things happen according to their own law. An interest in death, for example, frequently visits people precisely at a young age. Then, for the meanwhile, it leaves people in peace and lets them simply live and kick back. His head low, Zawisza walked in the direction of his temporary home, which was remarkable for the number of novelty lamps there, items you could safely assume to be the fruits of a weird, otherworldly imagination. An enormous, beautiful creature was sitting on the windowsill. It had a 5-cornered dome with orange drapery, and a golden brocade ribbon ran around 5 corners, like something on the cap of a Byzantine priest. Under the dome was a leg made of wood, decorated with an engraved image of bears in a pine forest. Then there was one with panels of copper sheeting etched with a kind of orientalizing pattern of holes, but which, on closer inspection, turned out to depict the Kremlin. Sadly, this lamp fell to the ground and is now slightly crooked. An amusing Soviet table lamp emanated a strange, bright green light and had a scepter sticking up out of it, at the end of which was a decorative green pear. Inside one lamp was a rainbow-colored celluloid trommel that turned, casting especially odd shadows onto the world. A brand-new wall lamp made of imitation crystal plastic had the inscription Vitebsk on the bottom, and still had its wires wrapped the way they came out of the box. And there were more. All the outlets were hanging out of the walls, and they threw sparks out into the darkness. The room had a mystical, ethereal aura. In the kitchen, Zawisza put together some eardrops of diamorphine. He was readying himself. In 2 days he had to go to a meeting at Hotel Epinal with a person who cannot be named here. He turned on all the lights and listened to the electricity meter in the front room start to hum more quickly. Then he threw himself on the couch and carefully dripped the medicine into his ear. The thickness of space-time slowly unraveled itself, and the world took on its normal, human dimension.